Welcome to Dusk and Empires. Tonight, we explore the hidden inner world of Nikola Tesla, a man who claimed his greatest inventions came not from laboratories, but from vivid, almost hallucinatory visions that visited him in the dark. If this sounds like your kind of bedtime story, subscribe before you drift off. Now get comfortable, close your eyes, and let history carry you to sleep. Opening meditation. Close your eyes, if you haven't already. Let the weight of the day settle into whatever is beneath you. The mattress, the pillow, the quiet darkness of wherever you are right now. Tonight, we are going somewhere unusual. Not a battlefield, not a palace. We are going inside a mind. A particular kind of mind, one that saw things before they existed. One that heard music in the hum of machines, that dreamed of rivers of invisible fire flowing through the air itself. There was a man who once stood at Niagara Falls and wept not from sadness, but because he had imagined this exact moment 20 years before it happened. The water, the turbines, the light pouring out across the dark gorge. He had seen it all in his mind before a single wire was laid. His name was Nikola Tesla. And this is the story of what he dreamed. Part 1: A Boy Born in Lightning. There is a story told in the village of Smiljan, a small settlement in the province of Lika, in what was then the Serbian heartland of the Austrian Empire. It is a story that locals repeated for decades after the man who came from that village became famous. They said he was born in a storm. It was the night of July 9th, in the year 1856. The sky over Smiljan was cracked open by lightning. Thunder rolled through the low hills and down across the flat farmland. And in the house of the Serbian Orthodox priest Milutin Tesla and his wife Duka, a child arrived into the world in the space between two great flashes of light. The midwife, it is said, looked out at the lightning and told his mother it was a bad omen. That this child of the storm would be a child of darkness his whole life. His mother, and this is something Tesla himself remembered with warmth and precision in his old age, looked at the midwife and said, "No. He will be a child of light." Whether those exact words were spoken, we cannot know for certain. But Tesla told that story himself, and it stayed with him. The idea that he had been claimed by light from the very beginning. That there was something in the nature of his arrival, the charged air, the electromagnetic sky, that set him apart. Smiljan in the 1850s was a place of extraordinary quietness. A village of perhaps a few dozen households, surrounded by meadows and low mountains. The church where his father preached was small and whitewashed. The fields were worked by hand. In winter, snow settled deep and muffled everything. In summer, the air was thick with the smell of hay and turned earth. Nikola was the fourth of 5 children. He had 2 older sisters, Milka and Angelina, a younger sister named Marika, and an older brother named Dane, who was by all family accounts the brilliant one. The gifted one. The one whom everyone expected great things from. Dane died when Nikola was around 5 years old. The circumstances have always been slightly unclear. Some accounts say he fell from a horse, others suggest another cause, but the effect on the family was devastating and long-lasting. And its effect on young Nikola was something he carried for the rest of his life. Because after Dane was gone, Nikola became somehow invisible within his own family's grief. He was alive, yes. He was clever, yes. But in the shadow of a lost golden child, a living child can feel like a ghost of someone else. There were times, Tesla wrote in his autobiography, when his mother would look at him with an expression he could not quite read. Not coldness. Not cruelty. Something more complicated. A love mixed with loss. A recognition of the child who remained, overlaid with the memory of the child who did not. This wound, this early experience of being present but somehow secondary, visible but not fully seen, would shape Tesla in ways that echoed throughout his entire life. He would spend decades searching for acknowledgement. He would give away his greatest achievements to men who barely thanked him. He would die in a hotel room alone, convinced that the world had not yet understood what he had done. But all of that was far ahead. In Smiljan, in the 1860s, Nikola Tesla was simply a strange and luminous boy. He was tall for his age, thin, with enormous gray-blue eyes that people consistently remarked upon throughout his life. He had a memory that frightened even him. He could recite entire books after reading them once. He could perform complex calculations in his head so quickly that his teachers sometimes accused him of cheating, because no one seemed to believe that the answer could arrive so fast without paper. He was also, from an early age, prone to visions. Not metaphorical visions. Not daydreams. He described them in his autobiography with careful, clinical precision, sudden, involuntary flashes of image, so real that he could not always distinguish them from what was actually in front of him. Bright lights would erupt in his field of vision when he heard a disturbing word. When he imagined a form, it would appear before him with the solidity of a physical object. He did not tell many people about this. He thought, for a long time, that it might be a kind of madness. But he also learned, slowly, to use it. To close his eyes and let his mind build things. To rotate an idea in 3 dimensions, change its components, test it against imaginary forces, all before touching a single piece of metal or a single wire. This was the gift that would make him extraordinary. His father Milutin was a complex figure. A priest, yes, but also an intellectual. A man who wrote poetry, who loved literature, who had a library that was the finest thing in the village. He was strict, occasionally harsh, and deeply skeptical of his son's interest in science and machinery. He wanted Nikola to enter the church. He believed that the life of the spirit was superior to the life of the machine. But his mother, Duka, she was something else entirely. Duka Tesla had no formal education. She could not read or write. But she was, by everyone's account, a woman of extraordinary practical intelligence. She invented things. Household tools, kitchen devices, weaving mechanisms that improved on the traditional design she had grown up with. She worked from before dawn until after dark, and she did it without complaint and without recognition. Tesla, in his old age, would say that he owed everything to his mother. That every gift of invention he possessed had come from her. He said it with a tenderness that suggested he meant it not as polite filial sentiment, but as a precise account of inheritance. She had given him the ability to see the invisible, to look at a problem and imagine its solution in the air in front of her, as clearly as she could see the loom or the hearth or the field outside the window. When Nikola was 7 years old, the family moved from Smiljan to the nearby town of Gospic, where his father had taken on a new parish. It was a larger place, a real town with streets and merchants and a school. And it was there, in those school years, that Tesla first began to feel the peculiar pleasure of understanding things completely. He was not always easy in social situations. He was too intense, too quick, too likely to correct his teachers. He made friends, but not easily. He was the kind of boy who would stay up late reading by whatever light was available, sometimes moonlight through a window, and who would emerge the next morning pale and wild-eyed but somehow more himself. There are stories from his school years that he told in later life with a kind of fond amusement. He once built a motor powered by June bugs. He caught them, attached them to a small wooden paddle wheel, and they flew in circles driving it around. He was delighted. He was perhaps 9 years old. Another time, he tried to fly. He had read or heard something about the principles of flight, the pressure of air against a surface, and he took an umbrella to the roof of a barn and jumped. He landed hard. He was not seriously hurt. But the memory of that brief, terrible moment, the certain belief that flight was possible, followed immediately by the unarguable fact of the ground, is oddly perfect as a metaphor for the rest of his life. He would always be leaping. He would not always land safely. Part 2: The Education of a Visionary. There is something worth pausing on, something that is easy to miss when we look back at the life of a great inventor. We imagine that genius arrives fully formed. That the young Tesla sat down at a desk one morning and simply understood electricity. That the ideas were always there, waiting only for expression. But that is not how it happened. What actually happened was slower, stranger, and far more human. When Tesla was 14, he attended the Higher Real Gymnasium in Karlovac, a larger town about 100 miles from Gospic. He lived away from home for the first time, boarding with his father's sister. The school was rigorous, demanding, Austro-Hungarian in its discipline and expectations. He learned mathematics and physics, languages, and literature. He studied German, French, and English. He read voraciously and remembered everything. It was in Karlovac that Tesla first encountered, seriously and methodically, the subject that would consume his life. His physics teacher, a man he described in his memoir with genuine admiration, had equipment. Real equipment. Machines for demonstrating the principles of electricity. Coils and magnets, glass spheres that crackled with static charge, small motors that hummed and spun. Tesla watched these demonstrations with the focused attention of a person who was witnessing something they have always known was true. It is a peculiar sensation, the recognition of something you have never explicitly seen before. He felt it as a kind of homecoming. He graduated from the gymnasium in 1873, a year earlier than expected. His performance had been exceptional. And then, almost immediately, something happened that almost ended everything. He returned to Gospic for a visit. And within weeks, he contracted cholera. Cholera in the 1870s, before modern medicine and intravenous rehydration therapy, was a serious and frequently fatal disease. Tesla spent months bedridden, weak, drifting between consciousness and something that was not quite sleep but not quite wakefulness either. There were days when the outcome was genuinely uncertain. His father, Milutin, sat by his bedside during the worst of it. And it was during one of those long, feverish nights that Tesla, barely able to speak, told his father that he wanted to study engineering. Not the church. Not law or medicine, the respectable professions. Engineering. Milutin Tesla had resisted this for years. He believed the church was the appropriate destiny for his son. But sitting beside a feverish boy who might not survive the week, he relented. He promised. If Nikola recovered, he could go to the engineering school in Graz. Tesla recovered. He enrolled at the Austrian Polytechnic Institute in Graz in 1875. And the years he spent there were, by his own account, among the most intense and productive of his intellectual life. He was extraordinary, in the way that occasionally creates trouble. He studied from 3 in the morning until 11 at night. He worked through the curriculum at double speed. He sent his father letters listing the number of books he had read and the hours he had studied. His professors wrote letters of their own to Milutin, warning that his son was working too hard, that no man could sustain this pace without breaking. Milutin read those letters. He wrote back to Nikola, asking him to ease the pace. Nikola read his father's letters, acknowledged them, and continued exactly as before. He could not stop. There was something in the pressure of learning, the feeling of understanding clicking into place, one piece after another, that was almost physical in its pleasure. He described it later in terms that sound very much like what we would today call a flow state. A sense of being perfectly aligned with the work. Of time dissolving. But there was also, in those Graz years, the moment of the great question. His professor demonstrated a new device, a Gram machine, a generator of direct current electricity. It worked beautifully. Everyone admired it. But Tesla, watching the sparks that leaped at the commutator, the mechanical device that converted the generator's alternating motion into direct current, asked a question that no one could satisfactorily answer. He asked, could we not eliminate the commutator entirely? Could we not use the natural alternating current directly, without converting it? His professor told him that this was impossible. That alternating current was useless for practical purposes. That the commutator, cumbersome as it was a necessary part of any electrical machine. Tesla did not argue. He was still young, still a student, not yet confident enough in his own thinking to disagree openly with an authority figure. But he did not forget the question. He filed it away in that extraordinary memory of his, in the particular drawer reserved for problems not yet solved. The answer would come. But not yet. Not for years. Life intervened, as it has a way of doing. His third year at Graz ended without him taking his final examinations. The exact reasons are somewhat obscure. Various accounts mention gambling debts, the severing of a scholarship, exhaustion, depression. What is clear is that he did not graduate. He left Graz quietly and did not tell his family, which tells you something about how the failure felt to him. His father died in 1879, before they fully reconciled over Tesla's academic path. Tesla had gone to Marburg, now Maribor, in Slovenia, taken a job as a draftsman, and fallen into a deep despondency. He was pulled home by family concern. He enrolled briefly at the Charles Ferdinand University in Prague, though again his time there was irregular. And then something shifted. He went to Budapest. He took a position at the Central Telephone Exchange. He made a good friend there, a man named Anthony Sigeti, a mechanically inclined young man who shared Tesla's enthusiasm for electrical problems. They walked together. They talked endlessly. And it was on one of those walks, in the Budapest City Park, in the golden late afternoon light of 1882, that it happened. Tesla was reciting a passage of Goethe's Faust from memory. He loved Goethe, loved the vast ambition of the poem, the reaching for what lies beyond, when something struck him. Not literally. Something in the mind. A flash of that visual clarity that had visited him his whole life. He stopped walking. he grabbed Sigity's arm. He began drawing in the dust of the path with a stick. He had seen it. The whole thing. The rotating magnetic field. The alternating current motor that needed no commutator, no mechanical device to convert or direct the current. The field itself would rotate. The rotor inside would follow it. Perpetual, smooth, frictionless motion. A motor that could run on the kind of electricity that a generator naturally produced, without any of the sparking, grinding, wasteful machinery that made direct current systems so cumbersome. He drew diagrams in the dirt of a Budapest park. He explained it to Sigety, who understood enough to recognize that what he was witnessing was not a student's idle speculation but a complete, functional, revolutionary idea. My brain, Tesla wrote, decades later, is only a receiver. In the universe there is a core from which we obtain knowledge, strength, inspiration. Whether that is literally true, whether the universe was feeding him something beyond ordinary cognition, is a question for philosophers and mystics. What is certainly true is that on that warm afternoon in Budapest, beside a path through a public park, the idea that would eventually electrify the modern world arrived fully formed in the mind of a 25-year-old Serbian engineer who had not yet built anything of importance. Part 3, Paris, Edison, and the Atlantic Crossing. There is a quality to the early 1880s in Paris that is worth pausing to imagine. It was a city in the middle of its own kind of electrical revolution. The gas lamps were giving way, slowly and unevenly, to something brighter. The Exposition Universelle of 1878 had introduced many Parisians to electric arc lights for the first time, a blue-white brilliance that made gaslight look amber and antique by comparison. The city smelled of coal smoke and bread in river mud. The Seine moved slowly through the center of it, broad and gray-green, with barges and fishermen and the long reflections of bridges. The boulevards were loud with horses and vendors and the particular crowded noise of a city that believed it was at the center of the world. Tesla arrived in Paris in 1882 and went to work for the Continental Edison Company. Thomas Edison had already, by this point, become one of the most famous men in the world. His phonograph had made people gasp. His incandescent light bulb, developed in 1879, after a process of iteration and experiment and enormous determination that is its own extraordinary story, had given him a kind of legendary status. He was the Wizard of Menlo Park, the man who had bent electricity to his will and given the world something as fundamental as artificial light. And the Continental Edison Company was doing what it did, installing direct current electrical systems in cities across Europe. Power plants, wiring, lights. The Edison system. DC, the thing that Thomas Edison believed was the future of electrical civilization. Tesla's job at the Paris office was engineering work. Installation, troubleshooting, design. He was good at it, very good, and he was noticed by a man named Charles Batchelor, one of Edison's most trusted European managers, who recognized something exceptional in the quiet, tall Serbian engineer who drew perfect diagrams and never seemed to sleep. Tesla was not idle during these Paris years. He was never idle. He worked on the alternating current motor concept that had arrived to him so completely in Budapest. He worked in the evenings, in whatever space he had, filling notebooks with calculations and diagrams. He built a small version of the motor. It worked. He showed it to his supervisors at the Continental Edison Company. They were polite. They were not particularly interested. The company was built on direct current. The entire commercial structure, every installation, every power plant, every customer relationship, all of it was direct current. There was neither the institutional appetite nor the commercial incentive to look seriously at an alternative system, however elegant its engineering. Tesla understood this. He did not argue. He carried the idea with him like something folded in a coat pocket, present, close, waiting. In 1883, he was sent to Strasbourg to fix a problem at a newly installed Edison power plant there. A short circuit had occurred during the lighting ceremony, badly embarrassing the company and inconveniencing a large number of city officials. Tesla was sent to sort it out. He did, efficiently and quietly. And while he was there, in whatever time he could claim for himself, he built something. He built the first physical prototype of his alternating current induction motor. With parts assembled in a backroom, with wire and iron and his own careful hands, he assembled the machine that had existed in his mind for a year and turned it on. The rotor spun. There is something profoundly human about that moment. The years of carrying an idea. The failed formal educations, the uncertain career, the grief of being overlooked, the long evenings working alone. And then the moment when the physical world confirms what the mind has been quietly insisting all along. The rotor spun. He brought the motor back to Paris. Again he tried to interest the company management. Again, politely, they declined. The structure of their business did not accommodate revolutionary ideas about the fundamental nature of electrical systems. It was Charles Batchelor who finally suggested the obvious next step. He was returning to America, to Edison's main laboratory in New Jersey, and he thought Tesla should come with him. He wrote a letter of introduction, a letter that Tesla himself later described as saying, in its essential message, "I know two great men, and you are one of them. This young man is the other." Whether those were the exact words, the sentiment was apparently warm enough. Tesla decided to go. He almost didn't make it. He arrived at the railway station in Paris to find that his money had been stolen, his tickets, his luggage, nearly everything. He managed, with what little he had left, to purchase a cheaper ticket and reach the port. He crossed the Atlantic on a ship in conditions considerably less comfortable than he had planned. He arrived in New York in June of 1884 with 4 cents in his pocket, some mathematical papers, a few personal items, and a letter of introduction to one of the most powerful inventors in the world. He was 27 years old. The city he arrived in was extraordinary and overwhelming. New York in 1884 was a city in the middle of its own transformation. The Brooklyn Bridge had just opened. It was the longest suspension bridge in the world, a marvel of engineering that drew tourists and wonder from across the country. The streets were crowded and loud with cart traffic and vendors and the particular smell of a city whose sanitation infrastructure had not yet caught up with its population. Tesla walked through those streets with wide, quiet eyes, taking it in. He was always observant. He noticed the texture of surfaces, the quality of light, the way sound behaved in different spaces. He had a quality of presence, of inhabiting a moment fully, that later would express itself in his remarkable descriptions of his own experiments and observations. He made his way to Edison's laboratory in Lower Manhattan. Thomas Alva Edison was 47 years old. He was short, stocky, informal in dress and manner. He was partially deaf, a fact he turned to his advantage by claiming it helped him concentrate. He worked with furious intensity, surrounded by a team of engineers and machinists he called his muckers, who shared his irregular hours and his commitment to practical results. The two men met. There is no record of what exactly was said in that first meeting. We know that Edison was impressed, or at least interested. Bachelor's recommendation counted for something. We know that Tesla went to work almost immediately, assigned to troubleshooting problems with the Edison electrical systems installed on the ocean liner SS Oregon, which was experiencing persistent failures with its lighting equipment. Tesla worked through the night. He repaired both generators. He came back at dawn, walking past Edison and Bachelor on the street, and when Edison heard what had been accomplished in a single night, he said something to Bachelor, something like, "This is a damn good man." For a time, it seemed it might work. Two extraordinary minds in the same room, both devoted to the practical application of electricity, both possessed of extraordinary focus and working capacity. But their minds were not alike. And their relationship to ideas was not alike. Edison was a man of iteration and empiricism. He believed in trying things until something worked. He distrusted mathematical theory. He distrusted anything he could not immediately test and observe. His genius was real and enormous, but it was a genius of persistence and practical ingenuity rather than the kind of theoretical vision that Tesla inhabited. Tesla was the opposite. He had a completed image of things before he built them. He distrusted unnecessary trial and error. He believed that careful thought should precede physical construction. They disagreed, too, about something more fundamental, the nature of electricity itself. Tesla knew there was a better way. He had known it since Budapest. And he told Edison about it. Edison's response was not enthusiastic. He listened, apparently, and then he told Tesla, with the bluntness for which he was known, that alternating current was dangerous, impractical, and commercially irrelevant. That the future was direct current, and that Tesla should focus his energies on improving the system that existed rather than dreaming about a system that did not. Tesla worked on. He improved Edison's generators. He redesigned them with significant efficiency gains. Edison, according to Tesla's account, had promised him $50,000, a very large sum in 1884, if he could accomplish these improvements. Tesla accomplished them. And then he asked about the $50,000. Edison laughed. He told Tesla it had been a joke. American humor, he said. Tesla did not find it funny. He resigned from the Edison Company in 1885. He walked out of that laboratory and into the streets of New York without a job, without significant savings, and without a particularly clear plan for what came next. Part 4: The Ditch, the Patent, and the Partnership. There is a period in Tesla's life that historians and biographers pass through quickly, as if its awkwardness makes them uncomfortable. It is the period between 1885 and 1887. A gap between the bright promise of Paris and the brilliance that was coming. These were the years when Nikola Tesla dug ditches. Not metaphorically. Literally. He worked as a manual laborer, digging trenches for the installation of the Edison Electric Light Company's cable systems in New York. The very company whose parent he had left. The very direct current system he believed was inferior. He was 30 years old. Thin, tall, formal in bearing even in work clothes. A man who spoke 6 languages and had constructed a functioning alternating current motor in a backroom in Strasbourg was now carrying a shovel through the streets of Lower Manhattan. He said very little about this period in his autobiography. The few lines he devoted to it are careful and dry, as if he were describing something that happened to someone else. But the shape of what he described, the isolation, the financial desperation, the sense of having fallen from a height he could see above him but could not yet reach, suggests that these were among the most difficult months of his life. There was, during this time, a brief and unsatisfying episode with a small company formed around his patents, the Tesla Electric Light and Manufacturing Company, founded in 1885 with the backing of some local businessmen. Tesla designed arc lighting systems for them, systems that worked well, that were installed in the streets of Rahway, New Jersey. He was issued patents for his designs. And then the businessmen, having secured the patents, restructured the company in a way that pushed Tesla out. He was left, again, without position or money. He received his patents. He received stock certificates in a reorganized company that turned out to be worthless. So he dug ditches. The streets of Lower Manhattan in the mid-1880s were a complex topography of mud and cobblestone, gas lines and new electrical conduits, horse droppings and puddles that reflected the occasional arc light. The city was loud and indifferent to the men who worked in its infrastructure. Tesla was one of many. He was not, in any way that was visible on the street, remarkable. But inside that extraordinary mind, the ideas did not stop. They never stopped. In 1887, Tesla's fortune shifted. He met 2 men, Alfred Brown, a superintendent with the Western Union Telegraph Company, and Charles Peck, a New York lawyer. Both were men of some experience with the relationship between invention and commerce. Both were capable of recognizing an unusually promising idea when it was presented to them with the careful clarity that Tesla brought to everything. Tesla explained his alternating current system. He described the rotating magnetic field. He drew diagrams. He answered questions with precision and patience. Brown and Peck agreed to fund him. They formed a partnership. They rented a laboratory space on South Fifth Avenue in Manhattan. They brought in equipment. And Tesla, for the first time since that afternoon in a Budapest park, had the physical means to build out his complete vision. The work he did in that laboratory between 1887 and 1888 was among the most concentrated and productive of any inventor in the history of electrical science. He worked on his induction motor, the motor that ran on alternating current without a commutator. He refined the principles. He built prototypes that worked better and better, more smoothly and efficiently with each iteration. He filed patents, not 1 or 2, but a cascade of patents, 34 applications in 1 year, covering every aspect of the alternating current system: generation, transmission, motors, transformers. These patents were comprehensive. They were filed with a thoroughness that reflected not just Tesla's engineering genius but his understanding, however intuitive, that a revolutionary idea needed to be protected on every side if it was to survive the world of commerce. And then, in May of 1888, he gave a lecture. He presented his work to the American Institute of Electrical Engineers at Columbia University in New York. The hall was filled with engineers, scientists, and industrialists. Tesla stood at the front, tall and dark-suited, with his careful accent and his precise language, and he described the alternating current system in its entirety. He was not a showy man. He did not perform. He explained. He demonstrated. He let the ideas speak. The room understood what it was hearing. He had already been working with alternating current, had already purchased European patents for transformer designs. But he did not have a motor. He did not have the complete picture. Tesla had the complete picture. Westinghouse came to the South Fifth Avenue laboratory. He saw the motors running. He spoke with Tesla at length. They came to an agreement. Westinghouse purchased Tesla's AC patents for a sum of $60,000, plus royalties of $2.50 per AC horsepower produced using Tesla's system. This was, in 1888, a transformative amount of money. It was also, as it would turn out, a fraction of what the patents would eventually be worth. The Westinghouse engineers had their own AC systems, their own designs, their own ways of doing things. They had been working with AC at 60 Hz. Tesla's system was designed for 60 cycles per second. There were compatibility questions, engineering questions, questions about how to integrate Tesla's motors into the Westinghouse infrastructure. Tesla worked through these questions with characteristic intensity, but the collaborative environment was not as comfortable as working alone. He returned to New York after about a year, leaving the engineers to continue the work. And into this moment of transition and nascent success came the most famous technological battle of the 19th century. Part 5: The War of Currents. Imagine a city lit by electricity for the first time. Not the flickering, acrid light of arc lamps in the street, but warm, steady, indoor electric light. Light in homes, in hotels, in offices. Light that could be switched on and off. Light that did not smell of burning gas or require a lit flame. This was what both men were offering. Both Thomas Edison and George Westinghouse. Both systems, direct current and alternating current, could, in principle, light a city. The question of which system would do it better, more safely, more economically, and at greater scale was the question that lay at the heart of what became known as the War of Currents. It began, roughly, in 1887 and continued with increasing intensity until the early 1890s. And it was a war fought not just in laboratories and lecture halls but in newspapers, in public demonstrations, and in the minds of people who were still trying to decide whether electricity in the home was a miracle or a menace. Edison's argument for DC was partly about safety. He had built his commercial reputation on a reliable, controllable system. DC at low voltage was, in most configurations, less immediately dangerous than AC at the higher voltages necessary for efficient long-distance transmission. He believed, or claimed to believe, that AC in the home represented an unacceptable risk. There was also, it must be said, a commercial dimension to his commitment to DC that went beyond pure engineering judgment. He had invested enormously in money, in time, in reputation, in the direct current infrastructure. Every city that adopted AC was a city that would not be buying Edison equipment. Every alternating current motor was a motor that used Tesla's patents and Westinghouse's manufacturing capacity rather than Edison's. He was not disinterested. No one in this story was disinterested. But the campaign he launched against AC in the late 1880s crossed from commercial competition into something darker. Edison began publicly promoting the idea that AC was uniquely dangerous. He cooperated quietly, and at arm's length, with efforts to demonstrate this danger in the most visceral way possible. The instrument that emerged from this effort was the electric chair. New York State was, in 1887 and 1888, in the process of reforming its method of execution. Hanging was considered inhumane, unreliable in its results. An electrical alternative was being investigated. Harold P. Brown, an electrical engineer who worked with Edison, began conducting public demonstrations of the lethality of alternating current, demonstrations in which dogs, and later larger animals including calves and horses, were electrocuted using AC power from Westinghouse generators. These demonstrations were performed, in part, at Edison's laboratory in West Orange. Edison supplied the equipment and the space, while maintaining a certain official distance from the proceedings. The aim was to associate AC electricity, Westinghouse's current, Tesla's current, with death. To make it viscerally and publicly clear that this was the current that killed. Brown even coined a verb for execution by AC, to be Westinghoused. New York State adopted the electric chair in 1890. Its first use was in Auburn Prison, on a man named William Kemmler, convicted of murder. The execution was badly botched, requiring multiple applications of current. It was witnessed by reporters who filed accounts that made for extremely disturbing reading. The effort to associate Tesla's current with death did not, ultimately, succeed in the way Edison intended. The economics of alternating current, its ability to be transmitted over long distances at high voltage and then step down for local use by transformers, were simply too powerful an advantage to overcome with fear campaigns, however graphic. And the great public demonstration of AC's capabilities was coming. It would come in the form of one of the most spectacular events of the late 19th century. But before that, there was a different kind of battle. Quieter, more internal, and harder to understand from the outside. Westinghouse, under the pressure of financing the AC expansion, came to Tesla in 1891 with a difficult request. The royalty agreement, the $2.50 per AC horsepower, was proving to be a significant and growing financial burden on the Westinghouse company. Westinghouse told Tesla that he might not be able to honor it going forward. That the weight of the royalty payments might ultimately force the company into financial difficulty, potentially ending the entire AC enterprise. He explained this personally, directly, and apparently with genuine candor about the severity of the situation. He reminded Tesla that it was the Westinghouse company that had believed in him, had purchased his patents, had fought Edison and the DC interests, had taken the commercial risk when the easier path would have been to continue with the existing system. Tesla listened to all of this quietly. And then he did something that has been the subject of admiration and also of some puzzlement among his biographers ever since. He took the royalty contract, the paper on which his future financial security was written, and he tore it up. He waived the royalties entirely. He told Westinghouse that the work mattered more than the money. That the success of the system was what he cared about. Whether this was the act of a saint, or of someone who fundamentally did not understand the relationship between money and security, or of someone who simply placed the idea above everything else, perhaps all of these are true simultaneously. What is certain is that it cost him an enormous sum. Later calculations suggested that the royalties he waived were worth somewhere between $12 and $17 million at the time of their potential peak value. He gave it away. He tore up the paper. And he never seemed to regret it. The war of currents moved toward its climax in the early 1890s, and the climax would be spectacular. Part 6, Niagara and the World's Fair. There is a photograph taken at the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago that shows the fairgrounds at night, lit by electric light. The buildings, constructed in white plaster and steel, earning the site its popular name, the White City, glow against a dark sky. The reflection of those lights falls across the surface of the lagoon in the center of the fairgrounds. It is a photograph of a moment that people who saw it described as unlike anything they had ever experienced. Some of them wept. Some stood in silence for a long time. It was not just that the buildings were beautiful, though they were. It was not just the scale of the engineering achievement, though it was extraordinary. It was the light itself. The quality and abundance of it. Electric light, in a quantity and consistency that had never been seen in a public space before. And it was Tesla's light. Tesla came to the exposition. He gave demonstrations, in a dedicated exhibit, of the wonders of alternating current. He passed hundreds of thousands of volts of high-frequency AC through his own body to light bulbs held in his hand, demonstrating that at the right frequency and voltage configuration, current could flow through human tissue harmlessly. He created sheets and balls of electrical fire, wirelessly lit glass tubes, produced effects that observers described, struggling for words, as something between magic and science. He had become, by this point, something of a public celebrity. In the years since his lecture at Columbia, he had moved into his own laboratory space, had demonstrated his AC system repeatedly, had been awarded honorary degrees, had given lectures that drew standing room audiences. He had also done something that revealed the particular quality of his imagination, something beyond motors and generators. In 1891, he invented the Tesla coil. The Tesla coil is, in its essentials, a resonant transformer circuit. It takes ordinary electricity and steps it up to extremely high voltages at high frequencies. The result is electrical energy that behaves in ways that ordinary low-frequency current does not. It produces long, branching lightning-like discharges. It can transmit energy through the air, wirelessly illuminating receivers at a distance. It creates effects that are visually unlike anything produced by conventional electrical equipment. The Tesla coil was not, in Tesla's mind, primarily a demonstration device or a piece of laboratory equipment, though it functioned beautifully as both. It was a step toward something much larger. Toward an idea that was forming, slowly and inevitably, in the back of that extraordinary mind. But first, Niagara Falls. The Niagara Falls Power Company project had been in planning since the late 1880s. The question was how to harness the enormous mechanical energy of the falls, 20,000 cubic feet of water per second falling 167 feet, and convert it into electrical power that could be transmitted to cities at a distance. Buffalo, New York, 25 miles away. Eventually, further. A commission had been formed, with international membership, to evaluate proposals. The commission studied plans from engineers around the world. And in 1893, following the success of the Westinghouse AC system at the World's Fair, the contract was awarded to Westinghouse Electric, using Tesla's AC patents. Tesla was consulted throughout the design process. The generators, enormous, specially designed alternating current generators, the largest ever built, were his in their essential principle. The transmission system, the transformers, the motors that would eventually run factories in Buffalo, all of it depended on his rotating magnetic field concept, the idea that had arrived on that Budapest afternoon in 1882. Tesla was at Niagara for the ceremonial opening. He stood by the falls, that enormous, ancient, indifferent thunder of water and mist, and he reportedly wept. Not from sadness. From recognition. He had stood at Niagara Falls once before, as a young man, and had told his companion that one day he would harness that power. He had been perhaps 19 years old, with no practical experience and no resources and no clear path forward. But he had said it, and he had meant it, and he had seen it in his mind, the turbines, the generators, the current flowing out across the darkness toward distant lights. And now he stood there again, and the turbines were running, and the lights were on. Niagara was the decisive moment in the war of currents. It was not a battle but a demonstration, the definitive practical proof that alternating current could do what direct current could not. In the years that followed, the electrical infrastructure of America and then the world was built on AC. On Tesla's system. On the idea that had come to him in a park, fully formed, like a gift from some interior source he never entirely understood. Edison's DC system did not disappear immediately, it lingered in some installations for decades, but its commercial future was settled. The future was alternating current. Part 7, The Wireless Dream. If you had asked Nikola Tesla, at the height of his fame in the mid-1890s, what he considered his most important work, he would not have told you about the AC motor. He would not have mentioned Niagara Falls or the World's Fair. He would have told you about the world system. There was an idea gathering in him through all those years of motors and generators and patents and battles. An idea that went beyond the mere wiring of cities. An idea about the Earth itself, about the planet as a conductor, about the atmosphere as a medium, about the possibility of transmitting not just electrical power but information, wirelessly, through the ground and the air, to anywhere on the surface of the Earth. He called it the world system. And at its most ambitious, it envisioned a network of transmission towers that would send electrical power to receivers anywhere on the planet. Free energy, available everywhere, to everyone. No wires. No infrastructure of copper cables and switching stations. The Earth itself as the conductor, and the sky as its other electrode. This was the dream that would drive the second half of his career. It was magnificent and it was real. Parts of it, at least, were grounded in genuine physics, and it was also the dream that would eventually consume everything he had built. But before the consuming, there was the flowering. In 1895, Tesla's laboratory on South Fifth Avenue in Manhattan burned to the ground. The fire destroyed years of work, prototypes, notebooks, equipment, the accumulated physical record of a decade of invention. He had no insurance. The loss was enormous. He rebuilt. He was not the kind of man who spent long in the wreckage of his past. He found new space, new funding, new equipment, and he began again. And in his new laboratory, he began working in earnest on wireless transmission. He had been thinking about this for years. The Tesla coil had demonstrated that high-frequency electrical energy could be transmitted through the air without wires. His dramatic demonstrations of wirelessly lit bulbs were more than showmanship. They were proof of concept. He began refining his theories about the Earth as an electrical resonator. He understood that the Earth itself had a particular natural frequency, a resonant frequency at which electrical energy would propagate most efficiently through the ground and the atmosphere. If a transmitter could be tuned to that frequency, and receivers designed to respond to it, then energy could theoretically be sent anywhere. In 1899, he made a decision that changed everything about his subsequent years. He moved his experiments to Colorado Springs, Colorado. Colorado Springs in 1899 was a small, dry, high-altitude city at the eastern edge of the Rocky Mountains. The elevation was high, about 6,000 feet, and the air was clear and dry, which was important for Tesla's purposes. Lightning storms were frequent and intense on the eastern slopes of the Rockies, and Tesla wanted to study natural lightning in detail. He also wanted physical space, distance from urban populations, to conduct experiments that involved discharges of electrical energy at a scale that was simply not possible in a Manhattan laboratory. He arrived in Colorado Springs in May of 1899 and set up what he called his experimental station. It was a large wooden building, barn-like in its proportions, with a tall mast projecting from the roof, topped by a large copper sphere. Inside was equipment on a scale that had never been assembled before for electrical research. He worked there for approximately 8 months. The notebooks he kept from that period are among the most remarkable documents in the history of science, pages dense with calculations, observations, diagrams, and occasional bursts of unrestrained excitement when something worked in a way that exceeded his expectations. The experiments he conducted at Colorado Springs were extraordinary. He created electrical discharges of millions of volts, artificial lightning bolts that cracked and branched across the Colorado sky with a sound audible for miles. He reportedly lit 200 bulbs wirelessly from a distance of 25 miles. He tuned his equipment to frequencies that caused localized electrical effects in the ground around the station, lights in the soil, as he described them. He also, famously, burned out the generator that the Colorado Springs Electric Company was supplying to his station, taking out power to the entire city for a period of time. He was apparently quite apologetic about this. And in Colorado Springs, he encountered something that he believed, for the rest of his life, was evidence of extraterrestrial intelligence. He was observing his instruments one evening when he noticed a series of regular, rhythmic electrical signals of a kind he had not seen before. The pattern was 1, 2, 3. Then again. Regular, spaced, clearly artificial in their structure. He eventually concluded that they were most likely natural phenomena, possibly atmospheric, possibly resonance effects from his own equipment. But his first reaction was electric. He wrote in his notes that he had received signals from Mars. He later modified this claim, suggesting that Mars was only one possibility, that the source was unknown. But the initial certainty, the sheer exhilaration of believing, even briefly, that the electromagnetic sky was speaking to him in a mathematical language says something about how Tesla related to his work. It was never just mechanics. It was never just engineering. It was always also a conversation with something larger. He returned to New York in January of 1900, carrying an enormous body of data and a set of ambitions that had expanded in the open Colorado sky to their fullest possible dimensions. Part 8, Wardenclyffe and the Fall. There was a man in New York whose money had made possible more of the modern world's infrastructure than almost anyone else. His name was John Pierpont Morgan. He was in his early 60s in 1900, a large, physically imposing man with a leonine presence and a nose that disease had rendered reddened and bulbous, a feature he was acutely self-conscious about and that no one in his circle ever mentioned. J.P. Morgan was not primarily an inventor or a scientist. He was a financier. A man who moved capital. He had organized and funded the consolidation of Edison's various electrical interests into General Electric. He had reorganized railroads. He had, in 1901, created U.S. Steel, the first billion-dollar corporation in American history. He was the kind of man who looked at a promising new technology and saw not its beauty but its revenue model. Tesla came to Morgan in 1900 with his proposal for the world system. Specifically, he proposed building a large transmission tower on Long Island, a tower designed to transmit both wireless communications and, eventually, electrical power, across the Atlantic Ocean and beyond. Morgan was interested, at least partially. He was already aware that wireless telegraphy was becoming commercially important. Guglielmo Marconi was developing his own wireless system, and the race to be first with transatlantic wireless communication was already underway. Morgan invested $150,000 in Tesla's project. Tesla found land at Shoreham, Long Island. He worked with the architect Stanford White, the brilliant, flamboyant architect who would later be shot and killed in a famous scandal atop Madison Square Garden, to design the support buildings. And he began construction of what he called Wardenclyffe Tower. The tower was enormous by any standard. Its wooden frame rose nearly 200 feet into the Long Island sky. At the top was a large metal dome, the transmitter. Below, extending into the earth, was a deep system of copper tunnels and pipes, reaching down into the water table, connecting the tower to the conducting material of the planet. The construction was expensive. Much more expensive than the initial investment. Tesla requested more money from Morgan. Morgan was cooling toward the project, particularly as Marconi, working with simpler equipment and more modest ambitions, succeeded in transmitting a wireless signal across the Atlantic in December of 1901. Marconi's success was a blow to Tesla, though not for the reasons it might first appear. Tesla had actually anticipated most of the fundamental principles of radio transmission well before Marconi. His 1893 lectures had described wireless transmission of information in detail, and some of his patents covered key elements of what Marconi later used. But he had been focused on power transmission rather than information, and Marconi, with focused commercial ambition and simpler technology, had gotten there first in the public mind. Morgan asked Tesla a question that cut to the heart of the commercial problem: where do you put the meter? If Tesla's world system worked as he envisioned, free energy, available everywhere from the Earth's natural electromagnetic resonance, then there was no obvious way to charge for it. Any receiver tuned to the right frequency would receive power without payment. The financial model was opaque at best, non-existent at worst. Morgan declined to invest further. Tesla tried other investors. He wrote letters, made presentations, appealed to the sense of vision that he believed any intelligent person would share when confronted with the magnificence of what he was trying to do. He received polite responses and occasional small contributions. He did not receive the capital he needed. He reduced his staff at Wardenclyffe. He reduced his own expenses. He stopped paying the land taxes. He went back and forth between his laboratory in Manhattan and the Long Island site, trying to keep both going with diminishing resources. And then, in 1917, Wardenclyffe Tower was demolished. Not by Tesla, but by the men to whom he had mortgaged the property, the Waldorf Astoria Hotel, where he had been living for years without fully paying his bill. The tower was blown up, the materials sold for scrap, to partially offset the enormous debt that Tesla had accumulated. He was not there when it happened. He could not bear to be. There is something unbearably sad about Wardenclyffe's end. The tower that was supposed to give energy to the world, demolished to pay a hotel bill. The dream literally exploded and sold for scrap. But it is important to understand what Wardenclyffe represented in Tesla's mind. It was not a failure of imagination or of science. The principles he was working with: electromagnetic resonance of the Earth's cavity, the ionosphere as a conductor, the propagation of extremely low frequency waves through the Earth, are real. They are studied today in what we call the Schumann resonances, named for a German physicist who mathematically described them in 1952. Tesla had been exploring the same phenomena empirically 50 years earlier. The vision was not wrong. The timing, the funding structure, the commercial environment, these were wrong. The world was not yet ready to build what Tesla imagined. Perhaps it still isn't. Part 9: The Lonely Genius and the Hotel Room. After Wardenclyffe, something in Tesla's external life became quieter and more enclosed. The decade between roughly 1905 and 1915 was a period of continued invention. He continued to work, continued to file patents, continued to push at the edges of what was known, but it was also a period in which his public presence diminished and his peculiarities became more pronounced. Tesla had always been particular. His aversions were famous among those who knew him. He could not bear the sight of pearl earrings, a form of jewelry that caused him a physical sensation of revulsion he could not explain. He would not touch round objects. He had strong preferences about the number of things, napkins, towels, steps, which needed to be divisible by 3. He calculated the cubic volume of his food before eating it. These were not affectations or poses. They were aspects of a mind that processed the world with unusual sensitivity, that perceived patterns and regularities everywhere and was disturbed by their violation. They were also, in a way, part of the same cognitive architecture that allowed him to visualize electromagnetic fields as physical objects and hear resonance frequencies where others heard silence. He moved between hotels in New York, always living in hotels rather than in a home of his own. The Waldorf Astoria for years. Later, the Hotel New Yorker, where he would eventually spend the last decade of his life. He had no domestic arrangements, no wife, no close family nearby. His sister Marika and her children were in Europe, and he sent them money when he had it, which was not always. He fed pigeons. This became, in his later years, one of the most consistent and visibly tender aspects of his daily life. He walked to Bryant Park and to the area around the New York Public Library, and the pigeons came to him. He recognized individual birds. He brought food every day, even in bad weather, even when his finances were very strained. There was one pigeon in particular, a white female, that he spoke about in terms of deep attachment. He described her as beautiful, as having eyes like jewels, and said that when she came to him he knew that she brought joy to him in a way that nothing else could. When that pigeon died, sometime in the early 1920s, Tesla said that something in him had died with her. He said it without apparent embarrassment or self-consciousness. He said it as a precise description of an experienced reality. He was not, by any clinical measure, a social isolate. He had maintained friendships across decades with the writer Mark Twain, who had spent time in his laboratory in the 1890s and been enchanted by the electrical fireworks, with the sculptor Richmond Barth, with the writer George Sylvester Virek, who interviewed him multiple times in his later years. He was charming in company, genuinely funny, capable of warmth. But the central relationship of his life, the one with his work, with the ideas that moved through him, left little structural room for the ordinary intimacies of human connection. He had chosen, consciously or not, the lab and the mind over everything else. This was, in part, a genuine philosophical position. He spoke at various points about the superiority of celibacy for intellectual work, about the ways in which emotional entanglement depleted the creative energies he preferred to direct toward his experiments. Whether this was a rationalization of temperamental inclination or a genuine conviction is perhaps a question without a clean answer. What is clear is that Tesla was lonely. The particulars of his brilliance had taken him somewhere that most people could not follow, and the world, having taken what it needed from his ideas, had not always been careful with what it left behind. He had significant ongoing disputes with Marconi over the priority of radio invention. The patent battles were lengthy and contentious, and Tesla pursued them with what sometimes seemed like more energy than his financial situation could support. He made claims about new inventions, a particle beam weapon he called the Teleforce device, known in the press as a death ray, that attracted as much skepticism as interest. In 1931, Time magazine put him on the cover for his 75th birthday. He was described as one of the living figures who had most changed the world. The tribute was genuine, the admiration real. But he was living in a hotel room. The Nobel Prize had not come to him, despite widespread expectation that it would. The prizes and recognition had gone elsewhere, or been shared in ways that left his specific contribution underacknowledged. He continued to work. He continued to think. He filed patents into his 70s. He gave interviews in which he described inventions not yet built, ideas not yet tested, visions that waited, as they always had, to be called down from wherever such things come from. Part 10: What he left behind. On the morning of January 7, 1943, a maid at the Hotel New Yorker went to clean the room on the 33rd floor and found Nikola Tesla dead. He was 86 years old. He had asked not to be disturbed for 2 days prior, which was not entirely unusual. He was often absorbed in work or rest for extended periods. He had been in declining health for several years. His heart was failing. He had been struck by a taxicab some years earlier. He had always been an enthusiastic pedestrian, walking through Manhattan at all hours, and had never fully recovered. He ate very little. He slept irregularly. He had the lean, pale appearance of a man who was gradually departing. He died alone, in a hotel room, as he had lived for 40 years. His papers were around him. The notebooks, the drawings, the accumulated physical record of 60 years of thinking. Within hours of his death, agents from the FBI and the Office of Alien Property arrived to take his papers. There was, in wartime America, concern about the Teleforce device, the supposed particle beam weapon that Tesla had been describing in interviews for years. Whether it existed in any developed form was unknown. Whether it represented a genuine weapons technology was unknown. The papers were collected, inventoried, and classified. Many of them remained inaccessible to researchers for years. Some were eventually returned to the Tesla Museum in Belgrade, which was established after his death and which remains one of the most significant archives of his work. His ashes are there now, in a golden sphere, in the Tesla Museum in Belgrade. It is worth sitting with the question of what he left behind. Not in the immediate institutional sense, the patents, the notebooks, the museum, but in the deeper sense. In the sense of what the world looks like because of what he imagined. Every time you turn on a light in a home, in an office, on a street, you are using alternating current. The current produced by a generator operating on the principles of the rotating magnetic field that Tesla described in his patents of 1888. The current transmitted through transformers that step voltage up for transmission and down for local use, exactly as Tesla's system specified. The current that lights the screen you might be watching this on, that charges the device playing this recording. The electric motor, the kind that runs fans and refrigerators and washing machines and electric vehicles, operates on principles that Tesla established. The AC induction motor, the motor that does not need brushes or commutators, that runs cleanly and reliably on alternating current, is his. Radio, the transmission of information wirelessly through electromagnetic waves, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled, in 1943, just months after Tesla's death, that Marconi's foundational radio patents were invalid because Tesla had described and patented the key principles first. The court's ruling acknowledged Tesla's priority in the theory and practice of radio transmission. The Tesla coil remains in use in radio transmitters, in high-voltage research equipment, in the entertainment industry, and in the imaginations of everyone who has ever watched its lightning-like discharges and felt the particular thrill of witnessing what electricity really is when it is not domesticated. His ideas about wireless power transmission, once considered fantastical, are today an active area of engineering research. The wireless charging systems used for smartphones and electric vehicles operate on the same inductive principles he explored. Researchers are investigating longer-range wireless power transmission for spacecraft, for remote sensors, for situations where a wire is not practical. The Schumann resonances, the natural electromagnetic frequencies of the Earth ionosphere cavity that Tesla was studying in Colorado Springs, are today used in atmospheric science to monitor global lightning activity and in geophysical research. He left all of this not as a monument with his name on it, but as the physical structure of the world. As the invisible current running through every building, every device, every city on Earth. The unit of magnetic flux density in the International System of Units is called the Tesla. When a physicist or engineer speaks of a magnetic field in Teslas, they are invoking, however casually, a man who wept at Niagara Falls, who built an AC motor from parts in a backroom in Strasbourg, who fed white pigeons in Bryant Park. That is not a small thing. That is a life woven into the fabric of the world. Tesla became, in the decades after his death, something more than a historical figure. He became a myth. The archetype of the ignored genius. The man who gave away his royalties and died alone while others profited from his ideas. The eccentric who talked to pigeons and dreamed of free energy for all mankind. This myth is not entirely inaccurate. But it simplifies in ways that, if we are not careful, flatten the actual complexity of the man. He was not simply a victim of commercial rapacity. He made choices to waive the royalties, to pursue the wireless dream at the expense of more commercially tractable projects, to live in hotels on credit rather than to consolidate what he had. Some of those choices reflected his genuine values. Some reflected a real difficulty in navigating the world of commerce and relationship. All of them were his. He was not an otherworldly figure who existed entirely apart from ambition and competition. He wanted recognition. He wanted the Nobel Prize. He fought vigorously for his patent priority in radio. He had a real and human desire to be seen as what he was, the greatest electrical engineer of his age. And he was not infallible. Some of the claims he made in later life about the death ray, about some of the more speculative aspects of the world system, remain unverified and possibly unverifiable. He was, in the fullest sense, a human being. Brilliant, strange, generous, occasionally frustrating, profoundly alone, and possessed of a mind that could see things that did not yet exist. Part 11. The Dreaming Mind, what Tesla teaches us about imagination. Let us slow down for a moment, before we reach the end of this story. Let us rest here in the quieter question that runs beneath all of the dates and inventions and battles. The question is, what kind of mind does it take to see the invisible? Tesla described, in his autobiography, the nature of his thinking with unusual clarity. He wrote, "I do not rush into actual work. When I get an idea, I start at once building it up in my imagination. I change the construction, make improvements, and operate the device in my mind. It is absolutely immaterial to me whether I run my turbine in thought or test it in my shop. The inventions I have conceived in this way have always worked. In 30 years there has not been a single exception. My first electric motor, the vacuum tube wireless light, my turbine engine, and many other devices have all been conceived in this way." This is a remarkable statement. He is describing something that cognitive scientists today would recognize as exceptionally developed spatial and mechanical visualization. The ability to construct and manipulate complex three-dimensional objects mentally, to run them through operational simulations, to observe failures and make corrections before ever touching a physical component. Most engineers and scientists have some version of this capacity. Tesla had it to a degree that appears to have been genuinely extraordinary, not just in its precision, but in its vividness. He described his mental models as having the solidity and detail of physical objects. He could not always, when young, distinguish them from the actual world. This was, as we noted early in this story, something that frightened him as a boy. The involuntary visual intrusions, the sudden floods of light, the images that arrived without invitation and stood in the room as solidly as furniture. He spent years learning to manage them, to direct them, to make them useful rather than overwhelming. And what he discovered, in that long education of his own mind, was that the very quality that had frightened him was also his greatest tool. The unusual permeability between mental image and perceived reality was not a defect. It was a faculty. It was the faculty that allowed him to see a motor running in the air in front of him before it was built, to observe it in detail, to notice the stress on a particular bearing, to reconsider the geometry of the coil, to run it again and see it smooth and quiet. Modern neuroscience has not yet fully explained how this kind of exceptional visualization works at the level of brain structure and activity. What we do know is that visualization activates many of the same neural pathways as actual perception. When you imagine seeing something, the visual cortex engages in ways that overlap substantially with the engagement that occurs when you actually see something. In people with very high-fidelity visualization, and Tesla seems to have been at the extreme end of this distribution, the overlap may be nearly complete. This means that, in a very literal sense, Tesla's mental models were experienced by his brain somewhat as real objects. They occupied a cognitive space that had the weight and texture of physical reality. When he said he ran the motor in his mind and observed it working, he was not speaking metaphorically. He was describing an experience that, to his nervous system, had some of the qualities of actual sensory experience. This also helps explain the extreme sensitivity he had to sensory input. A mind so attuned to its own internal representations would naturally be more responsive to external stimuli, sounds, textures, visual patterns, than a mind that maintains a more rigid boundary between the imagined and the perceived. The aversion to pearl earrings. The discomfort with round objects. The precise threefold multiplication of napkins. These were not arbitrary quirks. They were the surface expressions of a cognitive system that was exquisitely sensitive to pattern, symmetry, and structure. A system that, when confronted with a pattern it found dissonant or disturbing, could not simply dismiss the discomfort. The discomfort was as real as a physical pain. Tesla also described, at several points in his life, a quality of creative thought that sounds very much like what we would today call the hypnagogic state, the transitional zone between waking and sleep, where the analytical constraints of full consciousness relax and images arise with unusual freedom and vividness. Many creative people throughout history have reported their most important insights arriving in this liminal state. The chemist Kekule dreamed the ring structure of benzene. The mathematician Ramanujan attributed his mathematical visions to a goddess who wrote equations on his tongue as he slept. Tesla's account of the Budapest Park moment, the sudden, complete, involuntary arrival of the rotating magnetic field concept, has this quality. He was not sitting at a desk, working methodically toward the solution. He was walking, reciting poetry, in a state of relaxed engagement rather than focused effort. And the solution arrived not gradually but all at once, complete and detailed. This pattern repeated throughout his career. The big ideas came whole. They arrived in moments of mental ease following periods of intense preparation. The preparation filled the subconscious with the relevant material, the questions, the partial solutions, the structural requirements. And then, when the deliberate mind relaxed its grip, something deeper assembled the answer and delivered it. The Japanese call this phenomenon mushin, the state of no mind, the condition in which the practitioner has internalized their craft so deeply that it acts without conscious direction. Tesla's version of this was not a martial art or a meditation practice but a relationship with physics and engineering so intimate that its workings moved through him without friction, and occasionally delivered gifts. It is worth wondering what would have become of that mind in a different world. In a world with better funding structures for basic research. In a world where the commercial and competitive pressures of the electrical industry had not made it so difficult to sustain large-scale experimental work without immediate return. In a world where the question of who owns an idea was less immediately consequential. We cannot know. We can only note that the world Tesla actually inhabited was not particularly well suited to the kind of slow, exploratory, fundamentally long-term work that his biggest ambitions required. The Wardenclyffe project needed a decade of patient investment and a commercial structure that did not yet exist. The world system needed collaboration between nations and industries that were not yet capable of that kind of coordination. He was, in this sense, a man of the future who happened to arrive in the present. His most achievable ideas, the AC motor, the transformer system, the Tesla coil, were achievable because they could be demonstrated quickly and licensed commercially. His most extraordinary ideas, the world wireless system, the free transmission of energy through the earth, required a world that did not yet exist. There is something in this that is not quite tragic and not quite triumphant. Something more complex and more human than either category captures. He was given a mind of extraordinary reach, and the world was given its benefits, and the man himself was given a hotel room and a pigeon and the particular solitude of someone who sees further than the horizon. That is the condition of certain kinds of genius. Not comfortable. Not entirely happy. But real, and lasting, and woven into everything. And yet, and this is worth dwelling on, Tesla did not, by most accounts, experience his life as a tragedy. He was often melancholy. He was often frustrated. He grieved specific losses with great intensity. But he also had the extraordinary experience of watching his ideas become the physical world. He stood at Niagara Falls while the turbines ran. He held a lit bulb in his hand while hundreds of thousands of volts passed through his body. He watched the white city blaze with his current. He had that. He had the particular, irreplaceable joy of a mind that creates and sees its creation take form. Not many people have that. Whatever else was taken from him, that was not. Part 12, The Current That Remains. It is late now. The world outside has settled into its nighttime configuration, quieter, slower, the particular hush of hours that belong more to dreams than to doing. There is a library in the city of Belgrade, in Serbia, that holds a collection of materials related to Tesla's life and work. And in that library, among the photographs and documents and reproductions of his notebooks, there is a photograph of Tesla as a young man. He is perhaps 30 years old. He is wearing a suit that fits him well. His hair is dark and carefully combed. His eyes are light gray or blue or some combination depending on the print of the photograph and the light of the room. He is looking directly at the camera with an expression that is difficult to name precisely. It is not arrogance. It is not the calculated self-presentation of a man who knows he is famous and is performing for the camera. It is something quieter than that. Something attentive. A quality of looking that suggests he is seeing not just the photographer in the room but something further, something the camera cannot capture. He looks like a man who has a secret. Not a dark secret. Not something shameful or hidden. A wonderful secret. The kind of secret that arrives when you have seen something beautiful that no one else has seen yet, and you are holding it gently, and you know that when you release it, the world will be different. That photograph was taken, most likely, around the time of his partnership with Westinghouse. Around the time of the World's Fair and Niagara. At the height of his powers and his visibility, before the years of Wardenclyffe and the hotel rooms and the diminishing funding. And yet even in that earlier, brighter time, the quality in his face is not triumph. It is not the look of a man counting his victories. It is the look of a man who is thinking about the next thing. The next problem. The next idea waiting in the dark of the future to be called forward into light. He never stopped having that quality. Even in his 80s, living on warm milk and honey in a hotel room, receiving the occasional journalist or visiting scientist, he spoke about future inventions with the specificity of someone who had already seen them running in the laboratory of his mind. The particle beam device. The improved turbine. The wireless power system he still believed was possible. Whether all of those late inventions were real in the engineering sense, whether they would have worked if built, is a question that remains open. What is certain is that they were real to him. As real as the motor that spun in the Budapest dust. As real as the current that hummed under the ground at Colorado Springs. He was not, in the end, diminished by age in the way that some minds are. He was quieter. He was less mobile. He was thin and fragile and dependent on the charity of the Westinghouse Corporation, which in his last years paid him a small monthly stipend, a gesture of acknowledgement, belated but real, from the company that had built so much on his foundation. He was also, in some ways, more himself in old age than at any other time. The social obligations that had never come easily to him had largely fallen away. The commercial battles were mostly over. He was free to think, and think he did, until the last hours. There is a quality in very old people who have lived entirely within their own minds, scientists, artists, writers, musicians, a quality of deep settledness. Not peace necessarily, not the absence of desire or frustration, but something that comes from having spent so many decades in the same interior country that it has become entirely familiar. Every corridor, every room, every window with its particular view. Tesla had that quality in his last years. He knew the country of his own mind completely. He had walked it for 86 years, since the night of the lightning storm in Smiljan, since the boy who could not stop reading, since the student who watched the sparks from the commutator and asked a question no one else was asking. He had walked all of it, the Budapest Park and the Paris Laboratory and the Westinghouse factory and the Colorado lightning storms and the Long Island Tower rising into a gray sky. He had walked the hotel corridors and the paths of Bryant Park with his pockets full of grain for the birds. He had walked through the entire electric century, from the moment before there were electric lights to the moment before there were electric computers, carrying in his hands the invisible fire that made so much of it possible. And when he died, on that January morning in 1943, the current he had discovered did not die with him. It kept moving. It keeps moving now. Through the wires and the walls of every building you have ever entered. Through the grid that connects generators to homes to devices to the small light that might be illuminating whatever room you are in, right now, as your eyes grow heavy and the world gentles down toward sleep. That current is his. Not legally, not commercially, those claims were settled long ago, and not always in his favor. But in the deeper sense. In the sense that his mind first described it, first mapped it, first said, here, this is how it works, this is what it can do, this is the invisible river that can light a city or cross an ocean if we understand its nature clearly enough. He understood it clearly enough. And the world is different because he did. Think, for a moment, about the width of what he imagined. He imagined it not from a position of wealth or institutional support. He imagined it from a village in Serbia, from a rented room in Paris, from a second-class berth on a steamship with 4 cents in his pocket, from a patent filing in Lower Manhattan, from a wooden building on the Colorado Plains under a storm-filled sky. He imagined it because he was the kind of person who could not stop imagining. Because the ideas came, and he honored them. Because there was something in him, whether we call it genius or obsession or grace or the particular consequence of being born in a lightning storm to a mother who invented things and a father who read Goethe, that was oriented, always, toward the not yet real. Toward the thing that could be, if someone cared enough to build it. He cared enough. He built it. He gave it away. And here we are, in a world of his making, letting the current carry us gently toward sleep. That is Nikola Tesla. That is the story of the dreaming mind that imagined the electric world. Closing meditation. Let everything settle now. The story has been told. The current runs quietly through everything around you, as it has run through every night of your life. You have always lived in a world that a man from a Serbian village imagined. You have simply, perhaps, not always known it. Feel the weight of your body where you lie. The coolness of the pillow. The slight warmth of the blanket. The way the darkness in the room has a particular quality at this hour, not empty, but full of the ordinary magic of a night that is holding everything gently. Somewhere, a generator is turning. Enormous, patient, spinning in the dark of a power plant somewhere far from where you are. Turning because a magnetic field is rotating inside it, in the precise configuration that a young man described while drawing in the dust of a Budapest park. turning right now, as your eyes are closed, as your breathing slows. The electricity moves along wires too thin to see, through transformers that step its voltage up and down as if it were water moving through gates in a canal. It arrives in your walls, in your outlets, in the devices that fill your life with light and warmth and information. It has been moving, uninterrupted, in this configuration, for more than a century. Let the thought of that slow continuity be restful. The great systems of the world moving forward without effort, without drama, doing exactly what they were designed to do. The current flowing. The world held in its invisible electrical lattice, steady and quiet. You do not need to do anything right now. You do not need to solve anything or carry anything forward. The current will do what it does. The night will do what it does. And in some sense, as your mind drifts toward sleep, as the conscious architecture relaxes and the deeper mind begins its own work, you are doing what Tesla did in those moments of greatest insight. You are releasing the grip. You are letting the images come without directing them. You are entering the space where ideas arrive whole, and strange, and sometimes wonderful. There is no telling what might come to you in the soft architecture of sleep. Your mind, too, is a remarkable machine. It holds everything you have ever seen or felt or learned, and it works through the night in ways that morning will only partly remember. Let it work. Let the images come and go like weather. Let the quiet of this particular darkness be enough. The boy from Smiljan is at rest now. The great turbines at Niagara turn without him and because of him. The world he imagined is the world in which you are falling asleep. That is something. That is enough. Good night. If you're still awake, that's okay. Just close your eyes and let the story carry you. Subscribe to History for Sleep for a new story every week. Sweet dreams.